I'm sure you've heard about unconscious bias. We all have it and affects the way we think about people that we don't know, particularly people that in some way are not like us. And one of the places in which this matters the most is in the hiring process. If our unconscious biases line up and we end up systematically rejecting certain types of candidates, regardless of ability and fit for the job, we end up with a less rich and diverse team of people, which is worse for all of us. In this video, I'm going to give some concrete tips I've learned over the years to reduce the effects of unconscious bias on your hiring process. Hey, how's it going? This is Scruffy Leadership, a YouTube channel about management and leadership. My name's Ben, and I've been a leader and a manager in the tech industry for over 25 years. If you work in the tech industry in Europe or the US, then you only have to look around you to see that there's a diversity problem. A little over a quarter of tech jobs are held by women. And that's actually gone down in the last 2 years. So if anyone's telling you that the problem is solved and we don't need to worry about diversity in hiring anymore, please don't listen to them. And I've only mentioned gender so far. There's a diversity issue in regards to race, sexuality, age, and a number of other characteristics too. Age is a really easy example to think about. I bet if you imagine interviewing two candidates, one aged around 30 and one aged around 60 for a programming job, it's kind of hard to imagine that the older candidate will be a better fit. And what if you imagine that the younger one is a man and the older one is a woman? Okay, so how do we mitigate for these biases? The goal is not to lower the bar to make it easier for women to get into tech roles. The goal is to make it less likely that our hiring processes will reject women or people of color or members of other less represented groups for spurious reasons. A pretty comprehensive but almost entirely impractical way to eliminate all such biases would be to interview completely blind. So the interviewer doesn't hear the candidate's name, see their face, or hear their voice, or get any other information that can reveal age, gender, race, and so on. You could imagine some clever AI system that in the future might achieve this by randomizing all these features so that candidates' facial expressions and words come through as intended, but their gender, age, and race are randomized. That's a long way away, and I'm not proposing that in the meantime we should all interview candidates on Slack or Discord, as that would be a horrible experience for everyone. But we can do things now to reduce the impact that gender and race have on our hiring process in various ways. It starts with the way we advertise jobs. There's lots of evidence that simple choices can make a big difference in who applies. There's evidence, for example, that women are less likely than men to apply for a role they think they might not be qualified for. One way to discourage women from applying for a role then is to include in the job ad a bullet point list of required attributes. It can seem less dogmatic and less of a barrier to applying if you write these out in a paragraph of prose instead. There's also a range of uses of language that can be off-putting for some candidates. There are tools out there that will look through a job posting and highlight the problematic words for you. And this study from 2011 showed that ads including words like confident, courageous, and challenging are more appealing to men than women, while ads that include words like communal, compassion, and considerate are more appealing to women. The next thing to think about is the interview process itself. Bear in mind that coming to interviews in person at times you choose will be easier for some candidates than for others. As an example, a woman who already feels like the company she works for values her less than her male colleagues might find it hard to take time out from her job to attend multiple interviews spread across weeks. There's not going to be a single approach that works best for every candidate, but what you can do is make sure that the candidates know that you can be flexible about the timings of interviews. For example, having interviews at the start or end of the day, or trying to organize a batch of them on a single day. Next, it's a good idea to ensure that interviewers all have a predetermined set of questions to ask rather than varying them based on the candidate. These questions should be based around the expectations of the job. An extreme case to avoid is deciding, for example, based on the candidate's age or appearance that they aren't likely to be strong technically, and so only asking them the easy questions, skipping the hard ones. And then you might later compare them with a candidate that looks much stronger because they gave good answers to tougher questions. An easy mistake to fix is making judgments based on appearance. Unless the job explicitly requires a particular uniform or dress code, don't judge candidates on what they wear, what their hair is like, or how messy their handwriting is, or any other aesthetic qualities. These are likely irrelevant to their ability to do the job, but also are quite likely to be correlated with other factors like gender, race, age, or sexuality. And the reason this can be hard to do is that we all have this bias that causes us to prefer people that seem like us in some way. So if a candidate arrives for an interview that looks like the average of all your existing colleagues, you're quite likely to warm to them immediately. If a candidate arrives that looks and talks very differently from you and most of your colleagues, your unconscious biases will likely kick in and you'll probably find it hard to imagine them in your office. Another idea that can be a great way to overcome unconscious bias is to include a skills-based task in the process. This can be a lot of work, both for the candidate and for you, but it can give a much clearer picture of a candidate's ability to do the job. Just be sure to be fair in the way you set it up. If you give one candidate 24 hours to complete the task, don't allow another candidate a whole weekend, for example. Finally, avoid gendered language in the notes you make. Use they or the candidate rather than he or she. This might seem silly since you've already seen the candidate, but depending on how your hiring process works, not everyone who reads the notes will necessarily have met the candidate. And if you're looking through a set of notes from everyone's interviews that repeatedly say she and her, you're being constantly reminded of the candidate's gender. And unfortunately, whether you mean it to or not, it's quite possible that this is going to have an effect on how you perceive their suitability for the role. None of this is going to remove all the bias from your process, so it's important to acknowledge and be aware of your own biases. I'm English, I'm white, and I'm male, and I often find when I'm interviewing English white men, especially ones that went to the same university as me, that I have this instinct to give them more of the benefit of the doubt than other candidates. By being aware of this and reminding myself of it before each interview, I do my best to reduce its effect. If you have other ideas about how to reduce bias in the hiring process, why not share them in the comments below? And the same goes if you have any ideas for subjects you'd like to see me cover in future videos. And if you'd like to hear more leadership advice, check out the video that's on screen now. YouTube's algorithm reckons you'll like it. Bye. See you soon.